Notice that the default when you open Query Analyzer is for it to be set to reference the master database. But we don't want to be running our queries against the master database. We want to run them against the Shark database. So the first thing that I'll do is highlight this line that says Use Shark and execute that to change Query Analyzer's context to be using the Shark database. And now we're ready to run through these examples. Here is a line which I can highlight and execute simply by pressing on the green arrow at the top or clicking the F5 key. And notice that the results are shown for me in the pane below in this grid view. There's a tab at the bottom here that also shows me how many rows were affected. In this case, how many rows were returned by this query. So let's dissect this SQL query and see exactly what it's doing. The first word in this is select. You'll notice that it's capitalized, all uppercase. It's not necessary to do that. This is not a case-sensitive language as far as the commands go, but it is kind of a convention to capitalize all the letters in the SQL keywords, and so you'll see that we've done that in most of these examples. We're going to select first name and last name. Those are the names of the columns from our table, TBL customer. That's the name of the customers table here in the Shark database. When I run this, as you saw, it produces a grid view with two columns below showing me all of the records and just the first name and last name fields from those records. If I wanted to see all of the fields, I can say select star, the asterisk, run that, and then it will figure out whatever fields are in the table in the database and show me all of the fields for all of the records. If there's a null value, it'll show me the word null here. That's an indication that that field is blank for the rows where it says null. I can also concatenate information together. It's not necessary to use computed fields, computed columns in SQL Server to combine information together. You can create concatenations on the fly, and that's what we've done here. We've selected the last name and concatenated in with the plus sign a comma space, and then further concatenated in first name, and we're selecting this information into a single column from TBL customer. I'll execute this. You see we have now last name and first name, but notice that in the heading of the column here it says no column name because we didn't specify a column name for this custom column that we created. You can do that, and when you do so, it's called aliasing the column, defining a custom name. You can do that when you create a computed column, or you can do that with any columns. In other words, I could just say select last name as L name. In this case, we're selecting this computed value, the concatenated last name, comma, space, first name, as full name. Now notice that we're using a value here that isn't strictly a legal identifier in SQL Server because it contains a space. You can do that, you can use spaces if you want to, but you would need to use these square brackets around it as we have done here. That's why the square brackets in this case are required. So I can select these two lines, select all of them, run them, and you see that the name that we created as an alias, full name, now shows up as our column heading in the grid. There are other ways of creating aliases, two other ways. In this case, I'm leaving out the word as, and I also have an example here for you of not using the square brackets because there's no space in this full name. So the square brackets are not required. If I run this, I am also creating an alias even though we didn't use the word as. That word as is optional. And there's a third method that you can use. In this example, we're going to use the alias first, full name, and we're going to select that alias to be equal to the concatenated value of last name, comma, space, first name from TBL customer. Three ways of doing the same thing. Now you know that there needs to be a primary key in every table. So every row of the table is going to be distinct or unique. But in a select statement, you're not required to select all of the fields from the table. And it's very possible that you may select a field that contains duplicates. For example, here I'm selecting state from TBL customer, and when I run this, there are many duplicates. We have lots of customers, for example, here in the state of Washington. If I wanted to get a list of the distinct states that the Shark company has customers in, what I would do is add this keyword distinct into my select statement. When I say select distinct state from customer, it's going to give me only unique values back in my return set. Each of the rows in the return set will be different from the others. Now, so far, all the examples that we've seen are selecting from the entire table. We're not filtering the data in any way. Of course, that's not what you're going to want most of the time. Most of the time, you're only going to want to retrieve a selected filtered set from your database. And that's where this keyword, where, comes in. The where clause in a select statement allows you to specify a filter. For example, in this case, we're saying we want to see last name, first name, and state from TBL customer where the state equals New York. We only want the New York customers, and because we've specified that in our where clause, we're only going to get back rows for the 2 customers in New York.